In 1993, in the small town of Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, children began to disappear without a trace. Parents started escorting their daughters and sons to school lessons and stopped letting them go out to play afterwards. The local police organized searches for the missing school children and potential perpetrators. The maniac Burtsev hunted children in the small town of Kamensk. The turbulent 90s allowed him to evade justice for several years. The Rostov region gained notorious fame for the number of serial killers and maniacs appearing there. It seemed that after Chikatilo, there would be a lull, but no. Several years after the capture of the Rostov Ripper, a new maniac emerged in the region, Roman Burtsev. Seemingly unremarkable, quiet and modest, he committed his first murder in 1993. He worked at a machine-building plant in the city of Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, was married, and was what is called a grey mouse. He dared to commit his first crime at the age of 22. A serial maniac, dubbed the Kamensk-Katilo, operated from 1993 to 1996. The renowned psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky, who worked with him, stated that Burtsev was one of the most prominent maniacs in his practice. Roman was born in 1971 in the city of Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, where he subsequently committed all his crimes. The family was extremely dysfunctional. The parents drank heavily and neglected the child, so the boy grew up as an introvert and had difficulty communicating with others. Burtsev made his first attempt at assault at the age of 13, a transitional age for the boy. He dragged a 12-year-old girl into the basement with the intention of assaulting her. Fortunately, this was noticed in time by a local janitor, and the crime was prevented. Roman was put on record in the Juvenile Affairs Department of the police, but despite such a beginning, no one could suspect him of being a future maniac at that. After graduating from school, Burtsev joined the army and, upon returning, got married. But the first wife turned out to be no longer innocent. And for the man, this was a serious trauma. He wanted to marry a virgin girl. He married again from this marriage. A son was born, and at the same time began to nurture the dream of finding true purity. Roman often offered to meet with schoolgirls, but only those who already had sexual experience agreed to. This convinced the future maniac that only very young girls could be unspoiled. Burtsev first took a life in 1993. On September 5th, he saw a brother and sister playing near a dump on the outskirts of the town. Initially, he took the life of the 12-year-old boy, deeming him an unnecessary witness, and then proceeded to take the life of the 7-year-old girl. He hid their bodies in a garbage pit. The Rostov region gained notorious fame for the number of serial killers and maniacs appearing there. It seemed that after Chikatilo, there would be a lull, but no. Several years after the capture of the Rostov Ripper, a new maniac emerged in the region, Roman Burtsev. Seemingly unremarkable, quiet and modest, he committed his first murder in 1993. He worked at a machine-building plant in the city of Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, was married, and was what is called a grey mouse. He dared to commit his first crime at the age of 22. A serial maniac, dubbed the Kamensk-Katilo, operated from 1993 to 1996. The renowned psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky, who worked with him, stated that Burtsev was one of the most prominent maniacs in his practice. Roman was born in 1971 in the city of Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, where he subsequently committed all his crimes. The family was extremely dysfunctional. The parents drank heavily and neglected the child, so the boy grew up as an introvert and had difficulty communicating with others. Nevertheless, Roman, like all other maniacs, dreamed of making his actions routine. It was just his innate caution that prevented him from doing so immediately. After waiting for 3 whole years, he finally dared to carry out his atrocities with just a 2-week interval. On July 1st, he took the life of 9-year-old Ira Ternovskaya, and on July 16, 1996, he took the life of Natasha Kababin, who was 12. At the time of his last crime, he was only 25. The maniac sincerely believed that he would not be caught. He believed in his own abilities. And to some extent, Burtsev was right. Over those 3 years, not a single witness to his crimes was found. Of course, the turbulent 90s played a role when law enforcement agencies lacked personnel for effective work amidst a staggering number of... The main uniqueness of Roman Burtsev lay in his ability to conceal the bodies, as they were never found over those 3 years. Most maniacs, sometimes unconsciously, desired to be discovered, not hiding their victim. But for Burtsev, on the contrary, it was important to satisfy his own desires repeatedly, without risk. Roman was undone, on one hand, by his desire to conceal the evidence of his crimes, and on the other hand, by his ambition to make his actions routine. By taking the life of his last victim, Natasha Kebabin, just 2 weeks after the previous one, Roman decided that he needed to bury the body. But he didn't have a shovel with him, and then the maniac headed to a nearby village and borrowed a shovel from a local resident. And then he simply discarded it. But the woman, of course, remembered the guy who didn't return her gardening tool. And when the search for the missing girl began, the woman described the suspicious stranger. One of the distinguishing features was a characteristic scar on his cheek. Lead investigator Roman Amaev began checking people who matched the description. He settled on the figure of Roman Burtsev. Another clue was that in his youth, there was a record of attempted assault against him. Initially, they questioned his colleagues and acquaintances. The maniac had no close friends. From the dialogue with them, it was only possible to ascertain that the guy was a keen fan of adult films and magazines. Of course, this fact did not prove anything, but just in case, the young man was decided to be detained. Interestingly, Roman's immediate supervisor gave him a characterization of a dark horse, and indeed, it turned out that his colleagues knew little about this quiet and reserved guy. Essentially, the investigators had absolutely nothing on Burtsev, except for the testimony of the infamous village grandmother. Surprisingly, it was precisely this testimony about the shovel that prompted the maniac to confess. Of course, this happened thanks to the skillful work of the investigators. They simply cornered the criminal, and under pressure, he confessed, at first, only to taking Natasha's life. But there is a flip side to this, as many local residents pointed out. At that time, it was literally customary to coerce confessions from people or try to convince them of committing something by force. Either way, what was really going on? We will never know, and one would like to believe that Burtsev was indeed guilty. However, the investigators working with the criminal understood that such a person could not be limited to just one victim, and they decided to continue talking to the maniac. Gradually, he began to confess to other atrocities, but only one. At first, he showed where he hid the body of the penultimate victim, Ira Tanovskaya. Then, a few days later, he revealed the location of the bodies of Ania Kulinikina and Marina Alexieva. The maniac explained the assaults by saying that intercourse with an adult woman did not bring him the satisfaction he sought. He was looking for sincere purity. He explained taking lives very simply. He was afraid of being exposed. During the investigation, Burtsev repeatedly tried to simulate madness to mislead the investigators, but the psychiatric examination showed his complete sanity. Seeing that his madness was not believed, Roman refused to cooperate, stopped giving testimony, and fell silent. But the investigators managed to crack the criminal once again, and he showed where he had hidden the bodies of the first 2 victims, Zhenya and Oksana Churilov. As it is clarified, at the time of the criminal's arrest, no one knew where the bodies were hidden. The psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky, who worked with Burtsev, noted that he saw himself as a villain from movies when taking the lives of boys and girls. He derived particular pleasure from flipping victims onto their stomachs and suffocating them by covering their mouth and nose with his hand. At the trial, the maniac begged for mercy, but the verdict was death penalty. However, Roman Burtsev got lucky. Shortly thereafter, a moratorium on the death penalty was announced, and the Kamensk-Chikatilo was sent to a prison for life sentences. As of the creation of this video, Burtsev is alive, and he is currently incarcerated in the White prison in Solikamska. Recently, Roman has been constantly complaining about his health and writing plaintive letters to various funds that assist prisoners. In the letters, he requests to send him medication and lists his illness. Several documentaries have been made about him where you can learn more about his story. These include the series death triangle from the program Unexplained, But a Fact, Wild 90s, Chikatilo's Heirs, and Moment of episode dated 3.12.2012. Crimes against children have always been considered the most heinous and unforgivable. Studying Burtsev's criminal biography, it's hard to believe that all this could have been committed by a healthy and sane person. Nevertheless, the court psychiatric examinations precisely established that the criminal was aware of all his actions.